What is up, guys? My name is Matt from Magic the Greatening, and today I got another budget deck tech for you. It's going to be blue-black cycling. So this video I made for amonkhet, but there is a lot new and even better cycling cards, or cards that get buffs from cycling here in Hour of Devastation. So let's get into it. Let's start out at the bottom of the curve for our creatures here. We're going to be playing 4 copies of Cunning Survivor and 4 copies of Vile Manifestation. No Shadowstorm for Zir in the main board. We're playing it in the sideboard. Don't worry about that. But these cards are kinda a little bit better in my opinion. Vile Manifestation is one of the best cards in the deck by far, because he's kind of like Enigma Drake, except he's 2 mana. And it's like each card with cycling in your graveyard, he gets +1, +1, +0. So he will get a permanent buff on him whenever you cycle a card, which is super, super strong. Also, you can cycle him yourself for 2 mana. Cunning Survivor cannot cycle himself. However, he says whenever you cycle or discard a card, Cunning Survivor gets +1, +0 until end of turn and can't be blocked. So yeah, that's why I have him in here over Shadowstorm Vizier. I know Shadowstorm Vizier has flying, kind of has that prowess trigger with the cycling, but this card kind of still gets that cycling trigger and can't be blocked, which can help when you're trying to push our last 2, 3, 4, 5 damage, and you can just cycle out a whole bunch of cards in the same turn, deal 5 damage, unblockable damage with this guy, and win the game. Let's get into the final 4 creatures we're playing in the deck. We'll be playing 3 copies of Horror of the Broken Lands, 4 copies of HOU, 3 copies of Curator Mysteries, and 3 copies of Archfiend Ifnir. Okay, don't really need to explain Archfiend Ifnir. You guys already know how good this card is. One-sided Wrath whenever you cycle a card, so that's super strong and cycles out himself. Curator of Mysteries, 1 mana cycle out card, but you can play him for a 4/4 flyer. That says whenever you cycle a card, you scry 1. So most of the times I use this card to cycle, but occasionally I'll plop him down. HOU is one of the newer cards from Hour of Devastation that says, HOU costs 2 less to cast for each card you've cycled or discarded this turn. A lot of the times he's a 1 mana or 0 mana 4/4. For me. Doesn't get any just straight up buffs whenever you cycle a card, but just having a free 4/4 out or a 1 mana 4/4 out is super, super strong. And then Horror of the Broken Lands is probably one of the better cards in the deck, just because he can cycle out for 1, or if you stick him down, he can infinitely buff himself, give him +2, +1 until end of turn. So Horror of the Broken Lands, pretty good in this deck. Here are the non-creature spells. We're going to be playing 4 copies of Censor, 3 copies of Countervailing Winds, and 2 copies of Abandoned Sarcophagus. Censor is a no-doubter in the deck. Counter unless they pay 1, or you can cycle out for a mana. Probably one of the more expensive cards in the deck. Costs you about $8. Along with HOU, he'll cost you around $8. Countervailing Winds is pretty good in this deck, because for 3 mana, you can counter target spell unless its controller pays 1 for each card in your graveyard, and you're going to have a lot of cards in your graveyard. Your opponent might bring in Graveyard Hate against this deck, just to let you know, because we are playing Abandoned Sarcophagus here, so keep that in mind. We have some negates to counter kind of the stuff that does that. Or in the sideboard. We have some sideboard plans against that kind of thing. So Countervailing Ones helps against that. And then 2 copies of Abandoned Sarcophagus says you may cast non-land cards with cycling from your graveyard. All our cards cycle, except for the 2 we're going to talk about after this, and Cunning Survivor, and this card. So I don't feel bad about cycling on Archfiend Ifnir earlier, a HOU early, or Horror of the Broken Lands early, or even like a Countervailing Winds or a Censor, because we can always, once you stick this thing down, you can play it from your graveyard. Basically, just you cycle out your cards and then you just play them later. So it's like I had to play at least the 2 copies in this deck. I don't want to play more, because if you get more than 1 out, it's kind of just pointless. Abrade is running in this standard. It'll most likely get abraded once it comes out, but if it stays out, it can do some serious work for us. Alright, so our last 2 things we're playing in the deck is 3 copies of Drakehaven and 3 copies of Faith of the Devoted. Pretty standard stuff. Drakehaven is super, super good in this deck. You can turn our cycling cards into 2/2 flyers, And Faith of the Devoted, you can turn our cycling cards into draining for 2. So both these cards, if you have like multiple Drake Havens out or multiple Faith of the Devoted, you really can just win the game that way, just by either draining your opponent out or creating an army of 2/2 flyers. So these cards, no brainers in the deck. They were in my previous blue-black cycling deck. Don't really need to defend them at all. Alright, so let's talk about the lands. Playing 4 copies of Desert of the Glorified, 4 Desert of the Mindful, 4 Fetid Pools, 6 Islands, 6 Swamps. If you don't have the money, don't have to buy Fetid Pools, but do definitely get the Desert of Glorified and Desert of the Mindful, because they are lands that cycle. I know they enter tapped. We'll have 12 lands that enter tapped, which is half of our lands. But if you haven't noticed, we're playing a lot of 3 and 4 and 5 mana stuff, so it shouldn't bother us too much. Abandoned Sarcophagus cannot play lands from the graveyard, so keep that in mind. Don't think you can cycle out your lands and play them later with Abandoned Sarcophagus. It doesn't work like that. But late in the game, you draw into an extra land. Go ahead and cycle it out. See what you can grab. And then, yeah, so if you don't want to pay the $12 for the 4 Fetid Pools, just play, 2 extra islands and 2 extra swamps. Sideboard time, and we got some things against Graveyard Hate here. We're playing 3 copies of Nimble Obstructionist, and 3 copies of Negate. So those are our kind of sideboard plans against Graveyard Hate. Nimble Obstructionist can cycle out and counter target activated or triggered ability you don't control. So you can counter like something like a Crook of Condemnation, or if they got the lands that you can exile all cards from all graveyards, you just go ahead and counter that with cycling out a Nimble Obstructionist. Negate can help counter some things that that just straight up like spells that target graveyards, or even the Crook of Condemnation. This can counter. So if you suspect your opponent's playing Graveyard Hate, you might want to sideboard a few of these in, even like Negate, just to make sure. And then the rest of the sideboard is 1 more island, 4 Shadowstorm Vizier, and 4 Without Weakness. I threw in the Shadowstorm Vizier, and it's kind of in there to take out like the countervailing winds and some stuff like that. Throw in the Shadowstorm Vizier, throw in the Without Weakness, kind of get rid of all the other things and just play a creature-heavy thing. They're not playing a lot of removal, which what deck does that, but for whatever reason your opponent's not playing a lot of removal, just cram as many, you cram those creatures and get 25 creatures, start cycling out cards, and your army will get huge quickly. Without Weakness can give one of our guys indestructible, so it can save it from removal, and then it can also cycle out for 2, which is really nice. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe if you are new. Click the top right corner eye icon. Vote for next video's deck tech. And hopefully I will see you there. Peace.